All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're so excited for another episode of Driving with Dave. Today we're driving with Dr. Diane Strakowski. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, Dave.
Thanks so much for joining the car.
Yay, awesome.
How exciting. What brings you to town? What are you up to?
Well, we are here in LA. I'm here with my husband. I live up in the Bay Area, but we are here for my husband's high school reunion. And so anyway, he grew up in LA and we're here, and I get to LA as much as I can.
Nice to be back.
Yeah.
A little warmer, maybe?
A little bit warmer. It's been cool.
Yeah,
in Northern California, for sure.
This whole year, we haven't had a beach day. I mean, today on the beach was 63 degrees.
Oh,
it's like, what am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
But out here where I am, inland, it definitely warms up.
Yeah.
So we know each other through Bachelor content. Obviously, we talk reality TV. You're a therapist. What's the? I always never want to mess this up.
I am a psychologist.
A psychologist.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is that different than a therapist? Or
Yes.
Is it, okay.
Yes.
Just smarter?
More school.
More school, yeah, okay.
So to be a therapist, you do a master's degree, and then you sit for your license, which is still like 3,000 hours of clinical experience. But to be a psychologist, you could be a psychologist one of three ways. You either get a PhD, a PsyD, or a doctorate in education, which is actually what I have. So I did my master's, a 2-year master's, then I did a 4-year doctorate on top of it. Then I did a postdoc at Stanford, and then you sit for your licensing exam after you also have 3,000 hours of clinical experience. So I was in school 4 years undergrad, 2 years master's, a 4-year doctorate, and then by the time you get licensed. So
all right, so we have your credibility on file here. How do you? I mean, what's the motivation like to be in school for that long? Just wanting to help people, or like what was the itch that you wanted to get into psychology?
You know, I grew up in Chicago. Did my undergraduate there, worked at I've done everything in mental health. I worked at a halfway house. I worked on a crises hotline in Chicago, talking like inner city people, suicidal, etc. And I just knew I wanted the highest level of education. And honestly, like my postdoctoral training at Stanford was the best experience I could have gotten. So it was really working with certain people, lots of different populations. I do a lot of volunteer work because I really want to give back to the community.
What was there a moment in your studies that you were questioning if I want to do this, like just where it got real, or you're like, oh, this is heavy?
Oh yeah, because I had no money.
Yeah.
My parents were Polish immigrants. My dad has a whole story. We had no money, so. When I had to really take out loans, because otherwise I went to undergrad, I was a waitress while I was in school. Then I was working while I was doing my doctorate, so I was always trying to have some money, so I wasn't going to go in big debt. But there came a point where I'm like, oh my God, this is just too much. I need to get out and start making money. So that was
waitressing
hard.
Must have been another way to learn how to read people. I mean, that's a relationship there, right?
Absolutely. And in fact, I needed some money at this point, and I wanted to go back to waitressing. And that's how I got the job, because I said, I've been out of waitressing for a while, but I think I can gauge what people know before they even want it. And the guy said, you're full of shit, but I like your attitude, so I'll hire you. So, yeah. So
how long did you practice before getting into the reality world, where you're essentially watching the show like the rest of us, but have a more educated opinion on what's going on in people's heads? Well,
Dave, I am the OG, because I started watching in 2002, the first episode.
Okay. So yeah,
you're... But back then I was single, and I was just curious about reality dating, and I had my girlfriends over, and we would have watch parties, and I just always loved it. But I have to say, it's probably been maybe the last 5 years that I really decided to make it part of my page and part of my practice. Honestly, when I'd have my clients come to a session, and then at the end of session, I don't want this to be their whole session, right? Hey, Dr. Diane, what do you think of the latest episode? And I'd be like, let's talk. And I thought, wow, I have a lot to say about this. And then, as you know, I study attachment theory. And so to me, that was a perfect way to blend kind of my characters along with the show.
Has watching the show helped your practice? by having a case study of what you're looking at, or being able to relate it to people? Like, what's that relationship like?
100%. I mean, I think for me, I can't use my clients as, because of confidentiality.
Right.
I can't obviously refer at all in any kind of identifying information of a client. So for me to be able to say, oh, you're kind of like Hannah, or you're kind of like Clayton. And people will self-identify. So I'm not saying you're like that, but they'll say, oh my God, I can so relate to that person. And so we start the conversation there. And then, how can I have a better outcome? Or how come this person did this? And I get to dissect that.
Yeah, I mean, because, that it's very similar as a comedian. I go, oh man, I could go all day making fun of this or making fun of that.
Yes.
So there is a large petri dish of bacteria floating around, known as, and I'm not just talking about the Bachelor hot tub.
Yes.
That's a whole different petri dish. But we're watching it, and look, like I said, I'm no expert on anything. The only thing I know about is every breakup I've been through, every heartbreak, every fight. I've Googled, why do I feel this way? Why does this person not want to listen? And then it's like that. It's trying to fix a sinking ship with duct tape and prayers. But you realize that like these folks, they're young, they're adults, but their brains are, they cherry pick people that have so much they need to work on, that it kind of becomes ripe for like sampling what's, red flags and all that.
100%. For me, it's like I can talk about what is gaslighting, and I'm sort of like the cop on this. Like, this is what this is. This isn't this, because I do think a lot of people with their armchair kind of psychology, they'll say things because we pick it up from Twitter, right? Like, oh, people said, this happened, and because we're West Coast, right? I can look at the Twitter feed before the show, so I kind of get a sense of what might happen. And I think we need to be careful about those terms, because if we're using them so liberally, then actually people are going to be even more anxious going into dating, thinking like this is what's going to happen.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
Like, have you seen, I mean, when everyone's accusing so-and-so, I think it was at the time Greg Grippo, of being a gaslighter, just to have you as a certifiable expert say, no, this isn't the definition of the term.
Yeah.
If I say that, I'm almost nearly getting canceled from people. Did you see the pushback from that in your own world and in your DMs when you were like, hey, you're not using these words right?
Well, yes, and then people reference me and say, even the doctor says that's not the case. Now, I do have to be careful then. Like, for instance, somebody who has been, for instance, abused by a narcissist or something will see themselves and will identify, and sometimes therapists get it wrong, and I'm like, you have to, even if your therapist doesn't agree with you, you still now have to decide what to do, whether they have a label or not, right? It's still, something's not right in the relationship to even get you to that point, right?
Right, and so we're watching the show,
right,
and we're seeing something problematic happen, and we're going, that happened to me with this guy, so this person must also be that way.
Exactly.
So what, is it a critical mass that has to form before someone's a clinical, a narcissist? Like, can someone have a narcissistic trait but not be labeled a narcissist?
100%. So to be technically a narcissist. So there are narcissistic traits, and it's all on a continuum, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can have a little bit of, lack of empathy. You can be quick to anger, for instance. But to be a narcissistic personality disorder, you have to have, I don't have it on me, but like the DSM, you have to have so many qualifying symptoms. And really, to be like a malignant narcissist, you need to be like sociopathic.
Yeah, it's like
really bad.
It's like a shitty chef, right? Like,
absolutely.
I might be bad at making chicken cacciatore, but I'm not necessarily a shitty chef. That's not, so like, I mean, that's a terrible analogy. I don't know,
but I had done a post like, is he a narcissist or is he just an asshole? I mean, there's just guys who are assholes there, but to you, that also is what's going on with you. So let's say if I have an anxious attachment style and I need a lot of validation and reassurance, and I'm with a guy who is more of an avoidant type, more independent, I'm going to feel like he's being a narcissist because he's not giving me what I need, when somebody else might be dating that person who's also that type, and they don't see him that way, right? So it's really dependent upon the viewer's perspective, right? Like even that talk about Greg Gripo and Katie, right? Depending on who you were also in your own personality, in your own style, you're going to see it differently.
That's a great point. So it's really just it's more so
The
about
eye of the beholder.
the pairings.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can have someone that it might be a wild red flag because they can't provide their partner. Oh, by the way, we're gonna pull right into the shade and finish this convo here.
Okay.
Just to keep it nice and cool. Nice warm day here.
Yeah.
So yeah, because I mean, look, I mean, no one thinks they're the bad person. I mean,
right.
I'm sure I've been in the relationships where there's a brunch conversation happening about me because because how needy I was. You know what I mean? Like there's a million scenarios that you look at and you go, being redeemable. Like we shouldn't watch the show, in my opinion, to see perfection. We should watch it to be like, oh, that person was avoidant, and I should make sure in my scenario I'm not running away from my problems or whatever, right? Like
100%. So for me, really what I'm fascinated about is not the relationship per se, but like the conversation. So like, for instance, I can remember Michelle Young. I thought she did some really nice jobs. Also Gabby Wendy, breaking up with people. Like they handled themselves really well. I'm like, that's what a secure person does. And Michelle, I thought, came from a great family. I thought she was secure. But Gabby, like, earned her security, right? She had a tough family. But yet the way that she handled herself in those key conversations was really key. And then I could say, do that.
Yeah.
Be more like that. Hold yourself like that.
And do you think that the fact that the show pairs people up in kind of a fantasy world and then splits them into their own, like with Katie Thurston, right? Good friend of the show, did Driving with Dave. Her and Blake had a great connection. Yeah. But then he has his passions he's going after, which is fair, I believe. But at the same time, it changes the formula. Plus, he's out of the country. They don't live near 100%. Each other. So if they lived in the same city, he could probably juggle it all. But so I just saw that doomed from the start, and I think she did as well. That's why it didn't last long. So the show almost gets interesting when they're into their safe house visits, when they're into their post fantasy world. And is that where they need to really work on finding out who they are? Like, is that where the truth comes in?
100%. And I actually really liked Zach and Katie for that reason, because they lived in the same town. And it's like the problem, I thought the exact same thing with Katie and Blake. She just wanted somebody local. I couldn't blame her, right? She ended up with John because he was more local to her. How can you have a fiance that's out of the country?
And she just moved. She's in a new town.
I can't even imagine the poor girl. Like, that to me was rough. That's why I like Love is Blind, because everybody's from the same city.
Regional.
I think that's a key thing missing in The Bachelor, that if they had more local people, then it would, I think the chances of success would be better.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, my two biggest, like, limbic flaring, sad, depressive breakups happened when I was living in a new town without a job.
100%.
And I've looked at that and I go, and this is an issue contestants have, is mainly people that go on the show don't have a career. Now, more so now, there's people with careers, they juggle back and forth, but there's plenty of people, God bless them, because I don't blame them, that are the Johnny DeFilippos, the Eric Schwartz. I would have been that guy, being like, well, I got a headshot, I'm trying to act, I don't really know, I could use some Instagram followers. That's the 20s world that we live in. So, I mean, like, do a lot of these issues go away when you have a job or a support system?
Well, I'll use myself as an example.
Please.
So I moved from Chicago after undergraduate, was applying to graduate school, had a boyfriend. He moved to California for work. He was an engineer. And he said, Diane, come with me. I mean, I was 24, so I was kind of right in that age. And
so
I
this
said,
is like 4 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
I'm doing my math right.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And I've now since been married 14 years to a different guy, but okay. Anyway, I went because I thought, this is interesting. I'll see what happens, but I didn't have a job. And it was hard. It was really, really hard. So when I say it would be easier, it would have been. I moved to a new place, eventually find my fiance cheating on me.
Oh, no.
tragic, but you know what?
And this is old school. This is pre-social media.
This is
so
all social media.
You used to have to like run into them at the gym or something.
No. Like he moved out and literally I knocked on the door and he was with a woman. Yeah.
Wow.
And I kind of lost it at that point. But you know what? I have to say, Dave, the crazy thing, it was probably one of the quickest kind of breakups because it was done. It was one and done. He was with this other person.
The true colors came out quickly.
He met her at work. I was actually going to school for my master's and working full time. I mean, I had no time. And it was done. It was done. He had already moved out. We separated our stuff, but I had a wedding planned. I had a wedding dress.
Oh my gosh.
We were all about to
Did you immediately know you were going to call it off, or did you try to save it?
It was over. No, I mean, and I threw back the ring, and I was like, "Oh my god!" You
gotta, yeah.
I know. I mean,
take it, you go.
Oh, I know. I was like, anyway. It was a low moment in my life. But having said that, I would not have moved to California. I think I learned an incredible amount, and I actually got into therapy.
Wild.
Did a lot of therapy at that point.
And at that point, you were already. Were you already practicing?
I was not practicing because I was still in school.
Okay.
So I was in school getting my master's. I was not licensed
Do a lot of people that get into your career have therapies? Because it seems like...
It's highly recommended.
Highly recommended.
Yeah.
I mean, because how do you... I mean, I'll use myself as an example.
Yeah.
When I open my DMs as a normal guy, I get messages, people, I'm going through dialysis, my dog died, my mom said...
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not a priest, and priests have to deal with a lot of those types of things,
yes.
but I'm like, oh, this is a lot. There's like, in no previous world... Would someone just share this much with one person?
No, agreed.
But a therapist has to deal with
Yes.
a lot of people's energy.
Yes.
And how do you like clean yourself of that so that you can remain vibrant and inspiring others and things, and not like fall into rough.
I think the difference is, and it was hard, and in graduate school, because we have a lot of trainings, we are like pretend sessions with our colleagues, right? Because you play the client, so you're not practicing on real people, essentially. And then you do internships, because that's to get your 3,000 hours. And because you're so, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this because I'm quite empathetic, and I'm going to feel other people's pains, and you feel yourself like tearing up. But the more that you practice it, you're so in your head about trying to figure out what to do or how to help that you lose that over time, right? You don't, and there's still times where something is so unique, it'll just catch me, or I'll feel somebody's pain. And I think it's a way to connect with people, honestly. When they feel like you're feeling it with them, they appreciate that.
In that vicarious feeling,
Yeah.
I mean, it happens when you just see a good deed on the street, right? It doesn't even, it happens from observing goodness, but it can also...
Do you know why?
Why?
Because we have something called mirror neurons. In your brain, this is how we learn empathy. In fact, they found this fascinating study. There was a chimpanzee, and they had his brain open, and they were doing some studies. And one of the investigators licked an ice cream cone, and then his brain lit up in certain. So because he could like feel that, and so they identified in the monkey where the mirror neurons are. And we now know that humans have the same
mirror neurons want an ice cream now.
That's right. That's exactly right. So that's why when you see somebody crying or upset, you feel what they're feeling because of mirror neurons.
So are we feeling like trauma when we watch The Bachelor, when we watch a breakup? Because it can get rough out there. We watch that and you're like, oh. And then I'll put the live stream on right after, and it's like,
yeah, well, what's happening is you are then reminded of your own things, right? Like if somebody's father died, you're reminded of your own father and maybe their death. I mean, trauma, though, is mainly experienced. So we can have a kind of secondhand, but...
So it's not like reopening a wound? It's just feeling...
It can. I mean, it can open those memories, and so then you have to kind of ground yourself. But I'm saying true trauma is what we consider what you call an a priori, meaning like you have had something that's happened to you beyond the norm of normalcy, beyond a breakup. Like for real trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, you've like witnessed a murder, you've been raped, you've had something horrific happen. And then you have a series of responses to that trauma.
I'm very empathetic to that issue. My father passed away
Yeah.
from PTSD from Vietnam.
Yep.
And
Yep.
he died obviously years later. He died
Yep.
50 years after, but that was part of,
Oh, yeah.
that was on the death certificate. And it was years before they knew what that was. And
Yep.
even knowing it now, still so many veterans aren't getting treated. We're going to have
Yep.
a millennial veteran on the show here to
Okay.
talk a lot about that, because it's almost like now we live in a world where we can just scroll through the phone and we have so much access to entertainment
Yep.
that I feel like we can just push through to the next thing and not fully heal
Yep,
when we go through
100%.
an issue.
Yeah,
So like,
and my dad had trauma too. He was in the end of World War II, got separated from his parents, got literally taken by the Russians to Siberia.
Wow.
I mean, and this is my dad. This isn't my grandpa. This is my father.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then a lot of their coping mechanism is sometimes to not talk about it or whatever.
That's
and
my dad. Just squish it. Don't talk about it. You know.
how
yeah.
can someone in a relationship comfort their partner if there's something that maybe is unresolved?
Sure.
Or do you just have to, because you can't really teach anyone to feel.
Yeah, and in attachment theory, we would say that person is fearful avoidant. So they've had a trauma. Now they're easily triggered, right? So you do something that reminds me of something that my original trauma, and now I'm feeling physiologically like I'm there again, right? That's one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, that you're having like flashbacks, right? You're like a car goes off and it sounds like a gunfire, and so you're physiologically aroused.
I see people jump out of their socks.
That's when people have trauma. There's all different kind of varieties, right? There's emotional, physical, and then when you talked about like having a partner, you two together would have to figure out like, what are your triggers? What can I do to not trigger you? But then the person themselves is also responsible for being able to manage their triggers better. So trauma treatment is really complex, and oftentimes it's not just like one thing that's going to make a difference. Maybe it's EMDR and meditation and somatic healing, which is like a hands-on healer, and learning DBT skills. And so you have to really like understand what the problem is to then understand how to treat it.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And how quickly, when you are dealing with a client, can you pinpoint if they've got one of these issues with their attachment? Because does everybody fit into one of these main attachment styles?
Yes.
Or do they have like, I'm a little bit of this, I'm a little bit of that?
Well, so I actually was really curious. So I started studying attachment theory 10 years ago or so, when I really got into it. And a lot of the data, the actual science of attachment theory studies children, infants. But they were saying I would go to all the conferences because every year we have to do continuing education, et cetera. And I would say, like, what are the statistics? And everyone would say 50% of the population is secure. And I'm like, hell no. No. We have a 50% divorce rate. Now, that's also higher because a lot of people get married multiple times to elevate that. But I said, I don't think so. I think we have more insecure people. So I created my quiz that's on my website. And I now have the data, which is 75% of people are insecure.
Wow.
Only 25% are secure.
I would say I'm insecure.
Yeah,
When I've talked about
I would too. I'm the first to say it. I'm like, I'm not perfect. I think I've gotten better in my marriage, and that's the whole point. Like, you earn your security in a good relationship. But my data says that 75% of people are insecure, and the majority of people have an anxious attachment style.
Interesting.
Yeah, 46% of women, 39% of men fall in that category.
So relatively non-gender based.
That's right.
Pretty similar.
And the majority of those are the people who go on the show.
Yeah. Well,
Because
yeah, I mean,
they
you would
want
think so.
love, they're interested in relationships, they hate being single. Those are the people who are going to be fascinated by reality TV shows, and they're going to go, versus the avoidant person. I can even think of recently, like Jason and Gabby. He kind of X'd himself out, right? He got to be too much. They did the hometown, and then he's like, I'm out. That's an avoidant person who says, this is just too much. It's going too fast. I don't feel 100% about you. I can't do this.
Yeah. I mean, it's like with my relationship, I feel like when I came to the terms that my partner's personality type isn't necessarily who she is, that's just like
Yes.
the world she's operating through.
Right.
And the same here. It made it a lot easier to love. When you go, this person's not walking, because I feel like
they're not being malicious.
Yeah, and usually when you're like maybe younger in a relationship, you're like, if you love me, you won't leave me right now, and it's slam the door. It's like, no, it's not because they don't love you. They just need their time to decompress or do whatever. And I'm like the type who's just like the rabbit bouncing around, being like, let's hug it out right now, and just like give it a minute.
As you have quoted me in my quote, you're in hot water. And you don't know what to do. You can't take it personally. And the person just needs time. It's not that they really mean to be abandoning you.
Yeah, and I think I learned a lot about myself when in that hot water with my wife now, where there was circumstances where I would like damn near have a panic attack because we couldn't communicate in that moment, when in hindsight, I probably should have just gone and walked the dog. Yeah. But I didn't know that, and she didn't tell me that because she didn't know what she was doing, and we've had to come to terms with, like, I'll tell her, like, hey, I got a show tonight. I can't go to the show in a bad headspace. Like, it's almost like you don't go to bed, don't go to bed with the fight. I'm the same thing with, like, I don't want to go on stage and perform and I have before, but it's gotten so much better in the last couple of years because we've just kind of doubled down on learning about each other. Whereas 100%. I think on these shows, they can just be out on the first sign of a red flag.
Well, I think the anxiously attached person is going to fight harder and stay longer because they're like in it and they seek inconsistencies because they had inconsistencies. So that's almost like normal. That's what they're like the working hard is what I know love is. So that feels familiar to me. But the problem is all of this is completely manufactured because, normal relationships, do you know how long it is before people get married in general and dating in that early 20 group?
2 years?
4.9 years.
Wow.
People date 4.9 years and we expect them to meet, be engaged in 8 weeks or something and then get married. It's like, why aren't you moving in? Because people do it. I think like the way JoJo and Jordan did it is more real life, right? Give yourself some time, get to know each other.
And that's what Zach and Katie are trying to do. They said they skipped a whole year. They got engaged in 2022 in the fall, right? Yeah. No, 2023, and they're like, maybe I think they said 2025. They're like, let's just wait a whole nother year.
Good for them.
Yeah.
Like, what's the rush?
Yeah, and there really shouldn't be, other than pressure from the fans and maybe pressure from the 100%. Franchise.
And I think because it's been so public, we somehow believe that we should have like access to them, and it's like, it's not really fair.
Yeah, and I feel like when you consume the show, you want to have control over it. We made you, and I get that with my own channel. People want to feel control because they're 100%. Like they've invested their time. So there's like, where's the give back there? And I've had to tell people, and maybe this is good advice for anyone who's on the show. Like, you got to be like steadfast and like leading your own course, because if you start to sway for other people, and I heard a quote the other day that was like, don't avoid the trees on the trail. Like, I'm going to butcher this quote, but the idea being, don't stare at the tree when you're on the trail. Like, you have plenty of open.
What we say is, don't look for the pothole. You're going to hit the pothole, right? Look straight ahead, and you're more likely to miss it, right?
Because your audience will give you, different things in your head, and if you're not like steadfast, you can let that get to you.
Yes.
We have only a few minutes left, but we have Charity here. Can you believe how fast this is going by? We've got your Charity doll here. Yes. The season, by the time this airs,
She lost her shoe.
The season will already have started here. What's your advice for Charity? And she's a practicing therapist herself, right?
I'm pretty sure she's a licensed. I don't know if she's licensed yet, but she finished her studies, and so she is a therapist. And I'm very curious in how she handles herself, and because, of course, I imagine she's going to have a lot of empathy, and she's going to be great. And I thought this doll, like, look at the hair and everything.
There you go.
I mean, she looks
nice.
Just, and I, because also people are saying Charity's a doll, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to get a doll that looks like Charity, and so you will see a lot more of Charity.
Yeah, but she's still, young. So like,
yeah,
even
of
if
course.
like you learn in practice,
Yep.
kind of like how Rachel Recchia is a pilot,
Yes.
it's like,
Yes.
yeah, but like you still got to go fly a few laps
100%.
around, you know,
100%.
learn all the conditions here.
But the good thing is that by that point you've had enough education and you do understand people, and I think she's going to be able to communicate well through the hard spots, and supposedly she's happy. I mean, I want to see that. Of course, that'd be great.
We'll see how it goes. We didn't get too many crazy toxic things in the last season or so. I've heard from, maybe it was Susie, maybe she said it on my show actually, that she feels like the contestants are afraid to do the wrong thing because of how volatile it got with audiences. I guess that's an aspect of dealing with knowing in the back of your head, even though you're trying to like make this relationship work, that the cameras are there, and that does skew how what you actually might feel about something, and not wanting to come off like, you know, if you're Zach Shellcross and Christina Mandrell has a kid, it's like, I don't want to dump her because she has a kid, but I don't want to be a stepdad at 25. Right. I mean, these are things that in the real dating world you have to think about, you know.
And I can share my story about how to find love, because I was engaged young. Then that didn't work out. And then I had a lot of dating. I dated a ton of people. I'm talking hundreds.
Hot girl summer, or like hot girl 20s?
Yeah. Hot girl 20s and 30s. I dated them all.
Well, were you feeling a pressure that people talk about?
100%.
You know?
Yeah. I felt the baby pressure. I came from a big family, wanted a big family. But then I was in school, and mainly because I had to work too and pay my own way, it was hard. I ended up buying my own place. That was hard. I mean, I was working all the time. So I get that, like, my career came first and some of that slid. And I have to say, I personally think that watching the show helped me. And I call it going all in, because it's like, you know, how often in dating you're kind of half-assing it. You really are. Like, I'm going to fit him in between brunch and working out and yoga, and you know. And finally, one of my girlfriends said, Diane, you're not going to meet a guy at your book club. They're all women, right? And I'm like, you're right. So at 40, I was 40, single, dating yet another kind of narcissistic type. And I said, okay, I'm done with this. And I said, I'm going to go all in. Those people on Bachelor go all in. And I did. I had a dating calendar, Dave. I said to myself, I'm going to meet 100 people.
Wow.
I'm going to date 100 people.
So you went all data-driven on it.
I was data-driven. I literally had charts. I have a diary that my husband went and looked through. So I said, I'm committed to, I'm going to date 100 people before I make my decision. And Lyle, my husband, was the 51st guy.
Wow. So you made it just past the halfway mark.
I made it half, and then I had to quit because I'm like, okay, well, now I've met
51.
I'm not going to.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. But I literally had written down how I met them, where, all these other things. And I said, I'm just going to go through the numbers. It's like a numbers game. And I met him, and then I knew, because I also had enough data at that point to know who's a good guy and who it right.
So much in life is a numbers game.
Yeah.
Because it's all opportunity.
Yeah. But I am a testament to meeting somebody later in life when you really get determined how to date with intention. I have courses on this, you got to really go all in. You really got to go all in.
And not expect that,
That's right.
that at 23, the sixth guy you've ever kissed is going to...
Yeah.
And which can be tough, because a lot of people in the purity culture world put 100%. A lot of weight on that, early first love. But when
the 26-year-old goes, finally it happened, I'm like, oh, sweetheart. I thought it finally happened for me a lot of times too, and you just don't know, but you have to see it through, right? You have to see those relationships through.
And also I know a lot of people that have, like we talked about, rather than working on themselves, their relationship kind of duct taped whatever issues they had.
Yeah.
And that's going to come undone at some point. Whether it's after you have kids or at some point. You can't, I always talk about you can't do a job you don't love. And you can't marry someone that's not.
It's at that point that you really actually have to stick in therapy. So I kid you not, I had 7 different therapists. Not a single one had told me, boy, Diane, you have an anxious attachment style. But then by that point, I had already had enough education. I kind of figured it out, and I said, this is my work. I have to keep doing this work. I have to keep working on myself.
Did you do that because your normal... because you had spent so many years avoiding avoiding that work and just like putting your energy into your career?
I was doing the work. I just didn't have the name for it. Like I knew I was anxious and I knew I was struggling, but like I couldn't quite put it together. And then when I did, and why I again did the quiz and everything after, is because once you have a name for it, it's like we call it name it to tame it. Like then I knew this is my anxiety. Now I can work on fixing it. And
name
because
it to tame it.
Name it
I love
to
that.
tame it.
I always say the sunlight's the greatest disinfectant, and it's the same idea where when you can learn something, you quantum leap into this like, oh my gosh.
And that should be the name of this episode. You have to name what it is, because if I don't know what it is, and if I keep screwing up and making the same mistakes, and I don't have a mirror, and actually that's why reality dating show, and I've talked with lots of people from the show, they all say, I learned so much, because now you have to see yourself back.
Yeah. Well, hopefully some people learned some stuff today. And if they are still interested, which they should be, they can go follow you at BackToLoveDoc on Instagram. You have your quiz on there to find out what you're...
On my website, but yes, on my... Yeah, click in my information.
And we'll put your link in for YouTube as well. Thank you so much. Do we leave anything on the table here? I mean, I could talk to you forever, but I know we got to get going.
But Dave, I love your story too, because how long were you together?
About 8 years.
Wow, fantastic. But you got married, and I love that, because we need role models of good relationships. And, you know, I've got my husband with me who's a good guy.
Yeah.
And, you know.
And we do a lot of work. I actually just found, I was looking for the title of my car, and I was going through all this old stuff, and I found a note my wife wrote me when we were our 4-year anniversary. And it almost brought me to tears reading it, because we always had this connection, but it's almost like our environment and other issues were pulling away at us. We work in entertainment. You know, I was driving Uber late at night.
Right? Like you find the right person, but you're not ready. And I think timing is just so crucial.
Yeah. And we just fought so hard to really, even though we trigger each other all the time, gosh, she's a quiet introvert type, and I'm like, but we've really learned how to do that dance. And
well, that's me and my husband. I am the person, and he's the quiet introvert type. Yeah,
Tasha's,
it's a good combination.
Tasha's just like her dad. They like to read a book and be left alone, which is good. I can go do stand up, and she can whatever. But you learn how to make it work.
It's a good combination.
Well, thanks again, and name it to tame it. That's the episode.
Name it to tame it, yes.
All right, come back anytime.
All right,
appreciate you.
I'd love to.